Imagine walking into a classroom where the air is thick with the scent of chalk dust and the rhythmic grinding of a wall-mounted pencil sharpener. Or perhaps you remember the intoxicating, sweet smell of fresh purple ink on a warm Ditto sheet handed out by your teacher on a Monday morning. Here are 10 school features from the past that have vanished from classrooms. Chalkboards and erasers were once the undisputed centerpiece of the American classroom, serving as the primary canvas for everything from complex algebra to the daily alphabet. Long before the arrival of whiteboards and digital screens, these heavy slabs of slate and later green-painted steel demanded a certain level of physical interaction from both teachers and students. The rhythmic tack-tack-tack of a teacher writing out the day's lesson was the soundtrack of the school day. However, the most iconic part of the chalkboard experience wasn't the writing, but the cleaning. Being chosen to take the felt erasers outside at the end of the day to clap them was often seen as a privilege, though it resulted in a cloud of white dust that coated your clothes and hair. Students would bang 2 erasers together, watching the powder drift away in the afternoon sun, a ritual that felt like a brief moment of freedom from the confines of the desk. By the late 1990s, the dusty chalkboard began to be replaced by the slick, odor-free whiteboard, and eventually the interactive smartboard, leaving the dusty felt erasers and the screech of fingernails on slate as nothing more than a memory. The manual, wall-mounted pencil sharpener was a mechanical marvel that every student knew how to operate by heart, usually bolted to the wall near the teacher's desk or the classroom door. These heavy metal devices featured a rotating dial with holes of various sizes to accommodate different pencil thicknesses. There was a specific etiquette to using the sharpener. You didn't want to get up during a quiet test, as the loud, grinding whir sound was enough to distract the entire room. You would insert your yellow number 2 pencil, turn the silver crank handle with vigor, and hope you didn't break the lid before you finished. The smell of cedar wood shavings was a constant presence in that corner of the room, and emptying the shavings tray was a messy task that required a steady hand to avoid a spill on the linoleum floor. Today, with the rise of mechanical pencils and digital tablets, these sturdy iron grinders have mostly been removed, replaced by silent electric versions, or rendered entirely obsolete by a world that rarely needs to sharpen a wooden pencil. Before the era of high-speed laser printers and ubiquitous photocopiers, the mimeograph and the Ditto machine were the workhorses of school administration. The spirit duplicator, often called the Ditto machine, was famous for producing worksheets with a very specific shade of light purple ink. There was something undeniably nostalgic about the Ditto process. The sheets would often arrive at your desk, still slightly damp and cool to the touch. The most memorable part, however, was the scent, a sweet, chemical aroma of isopropanol and methanol that students across America would instinctively sniff as soon as the papers were handed out. Teachers had to carefully type or draw onto a master stencil and then manually crank the drum to produce copies for the class. While these machines were revolutionary for their time, they were messy, and the ink would often fade over the years, leaving old school records looking like purple ghosts. By the mid-1980s, the xerographic copier began to push these hand-cranked relics out of the teacher's lounge, taking that iconic purple ink and sweet smell along with them. The filmstrip projector was the ultimate harbinger of a relaxed school day, signaling to students that the lights were about to go out and a story was about to be told. Unlike modern video projectors, the filmstrip projector used a roll of 35mm film that the teacher had to manually thread through the machine. The most distinctive feature of this experience was the accompanying audio, usually played from a heavy desktop record player or cassette tape. A sharp, high-pitched beep would sound, signaling the teacher or a designated student projectionist to turn the knob and advance the film to the next frame. These presentations covered everything from the life cycle of a frog to the history of the Oregon Trail, often accompanied by slightly grainy, colorful illustrations. The heat from the projector bulb was intense, and if the film got stuck, you might see the image start to melt and bubble on the screen before the teacher could kill the power. As VCRs and eventually DVDs became standard in schools, the slow-paced, beep-driven film strip faded into the archives of educational history. Pull-down maps were once a staple above every chalkboard, serving as a colorful window to a world that looked very different than it does today. These large, heavy rollers contained multiple layers of maps that could be pulled down with a long wooden stick or a metal ring, revealing the political boundaries of the era. For many who grew up in the mid-20th century, these maps featured countries like the USSR, Yugoslavia, and a divided Germany, providing a visual history of the Cold War as it happened. There was a certain thrill when a teacher would snap the map back up into its housing, the loud clack, clack, clack of the spring-loaded mechanism echoing through the room. These maps weren't just for geography. They were tactile objects that defined the physical space of the classroom. However, as geopolitical borders shifted rapidly in the 1990s and digital maps like Google Earth became available, the static paper and linen pull-down map became an outdated relic, often left rolled up and gathering dust until they were eventually removed during school renovations. The overhead projector was a high-tech marvel of the 1970s and 80s, allowing teachers to project their notes onto a screen while still facing the class. It consisted of a large, glowing glass stage with a powerful bulb underneath and a mirror and lens assembly mounted on an arm above. Teachers would use special transparencies, clear plastic sheets, and colorful wet erase markers to write out lessons in real time. If you were a student in this era, you likely remember the low hum of the cooling fan and the blinding glare of the light if you caught it at the wrong angle. A common classroom trope involved the teacher's hand or sleeve accidentally blocking the light, creating a giant shadow on the screen, or the frantic search for a damp cloth to wipe the transparency clean for the next period. While they were a significant step up from writing on the chalkboard, overhead projectors were bulky and prone to blowing expensive bulbs at the worst possible moments. Today, they have been almost entirely replaced by document cameras and digital projectors that can display crystal-clear images directly from a computer. The card catalog was the heart of every school library, a massive wooden cabinet filled with hundreds of small drawers that held the key to all known knowledge. Each drawer was packed with 3x5-inch index cards, meticulously organized by author, title, or subject using the Dewey Decimal System. Learning how to navigate the card catalog was a rite of passage for every American student, requiring patience and a solid grasp of alphabetization. You would flip through the worn, yellowed cards, feeling the texture of the paper and the indentations of the typewriter ink until you found the call number that would lead you to the correct shelf. There was a quiet, tactile satisfaction in finding the right card and then embarking on a scavenger hunt through the stacks. By the late 1990s, these beautiful wooden cabinets began to disappear, replaced by glowing computer terminals and searchable online databases. While the digital transitions made research faster, it took away the physical connection to the library's collection and the unique, woody scent of the catalog room. Slide rules were the essential tools for any student serious about math or science before the mid-1970s. Often called slipsticks, these analog calculating devices allowed students to perform multiplication, division, and even complex trigonometry through the movement of a central sliding scale. Before the pocket calculator became affordable, the slide rule was a status symbol of the budding engineer or architect, often carried in a leather holster on the belt. Using one required a deep understanding of logarithms and a steady hand, as a tiny misalignment could throw off an entire calculation. In the early 1970s, when companies like Texas Instruments and Hewlett-Packard released the first portable electronic calculators, the slide rule's days were numbered. Within just a few years, they went from being a mandatory classroom tool to a historical curiosity. While today's students have more computing power in their pockets than the Apollo 11 astronauts, the slide rule remains a symbol of an era when math was a physical, hands-on endeavor. Cloakrooms were a charming architectural feature of older school buildings, typically found in the back of the classroom or along a side wall. Rather than the metal lockers we see today, these were often open alcoves or small rooms with rows of brass hooks for coats and a high shelf for hats and lunchboxes. On a rainy or snowy day, the cloakroom would be filled with the heavy scent of damp wool and rubber galoshes, creating a cozy, if slightly cramped, atmosphere. It was a place for whispered secrets during transitions between lessons, or a quick hiding spot during a game of indoor recess. As school populations grew and security concerns increased, these open cloakrooms were phased out in favor of individual lockers that could be secured with a combination lock. Most of the old cloakrooms were eventually walled off to create extra storage or converted into small offices, leaving only the faint outlines of where the hooks used to be in the plaster of historic schoolhouses. Inkwells and fountain pens take us back to the earliest days of the 20th century classroom, a time when penmanship was considered one of the most important skills a student could master. Many older wooden desks featured a small, circular hole in the upper right-hand corner, designed specifically to hold a glass inkwell. Students would dip their steel-nibbed pens into the ink, carefully scratching out their lessons in cursive on lined paper. This was a messy business. Ink blots were common, and many a student went home with blue or black stains on their fingers and clothes. The transition to the ballpoint pen in the 1940s and 50s was a slow one, as many educators believed that fountain pens encouraged better handwriting and more discipline. Eventually, the convenience of the Bic pen won out, and the inkwells were either removed or left as empty, dusty holes in the desks. Today, these desks are prized antiques, serving as a reminder of a time when every word written in a classroom required a careful, deliberate hand and a bottle of permanent ink. So, which of these classroom relics do you miss the most? Drop a comment down below to tell us about your favorite memory from the golden age of education.